All right, everybody. Can you all hear me? Everybody hear me back there? Okay, good. Thank you. That's the affirmation I need. Sorry, I was a little late. I got caught up mentoring a former student. Always on the job, you know. Well, thank you all, first of all, for surviving the whole day with us. Hopefully you've enjoyed it, and it's been amazingly generative and productive and fascinating. And now this capstone event is going to be even more so. So I'd like to introduce our panelists, and then the format is going to be very organic because we're going to see their work, their video work, and then there's going to be a conversation. And they're going to be conversing with each other, but also with us. And so I'm hoping that you all generate a lot of questions, and I'm going to walk around handing the mic to everybody so that we can keep the conversation flowing. Let me begin with Dulce Garcia, whose pronouns are she, her, and hers. Dulce is a fierce, queer, Chicana, fat femme, born in Mexico City, woohoo, and raised in East Los Angeles, woohoo. She graduated from UC Irvine with 2 bachelor's degrees and received her master's degree in ethnic studies from San Francisco State University. Her passion and commitment to serve underrepresented and underserved communities is rooted in an anti-oppression framework and is evident through her work in cross-cultural and multi-gender organizations. As a California State Certified Rape Crisis Counselor, she provides holistic modes of healing as well as interactive educational trainings while integrating rape crisis services. As a sexual health educator, she advocates for self-empowerment through education that is fun, non-judgmental, and accessible to her audience. Her film, With Conviction, won the Audience Choice Award at the Queer Women of Color Film Festival and screened in Paris, France at the International Lesbian and Feminist Film Festival. I want to go to that film festival too. On her free time, on her copious free time, you can catch her performing on stage with In La Kesh Dance Academy, the only queer and trans bachata and salsa dance academy in the US. Let's give a hand to Dulce Garcia. Can you stand up so people can see who you are? Our next panelist is Dr. Shada Kafai. She, her, and hers are her pronouns. Kafai is a lecturer at California State Polytechnic University, Pomona's Ethnic and Gender Studies Department, and she earned her PhD in Cultural Studies from Claremont Graduate University. As a queer, disabled femme of color, she is committed to exploring the many ways we can reclaim our bodies from intersecting systems of oppression. Shada is a disability activist scholar and member of the Los Angeles Spoonie Collective. She lives in Los Angeles with her wife, Amy. A big hand to Shada. And so now we're going to run the films, or how are we going to? With Conviction first, okay.
My name is Christine De La Rosa, and I'm 40 years old. I was born in South Texas.
That's the beginning.
My name is Christine De La Rosa, and I'm 40 years old. I was born in South Texas and grew up there in a little town between Austin and San Antonio, which had a huge Latino population, very Catholic, very military. It was one of those towns that for me, I wanted to get out of the minute I was born.
My name is Jewel Gomez. I am 62. I was born in 1948. I was born in Boston. I grew up there. I was raised by my great-grandmother, and I went to undergraduate school there. So I was there for the first 22 years of my life.
My name is Dulce Garcia. I'm 27 years old. I was born in Mexico City. Family came to the U.S. when I was 1. So I grew up in East Los Angeles. Predominantly Chicano, Mexican American, immigrant, working class families.
Coming out is something I guess you're doing all the time. The first time I knew I was a lesbian, I think I was around 8 years old, and I was pretty sure that I was a lesbian because I was deeply in love with the little girl who lived across the street from me. It became clear that you couldn't just tell everybody how you felt. I had a relationship with a student friend in high school for about 6 years, but we never talked about it. And when someone brought it up at school, I had to be very tough. But finally, when I left home, when I got out of school, I moved to New York, and I just assumed I would act like I was a lesbian and would be fine. But I finally came out to my grandmother and my mother in the early 80s, and we were all in a movie theater together, and I came out to them in the bathroom very casually and just to, see what they would say. And they were very easy and relaxed. And so from then on, I have felt totally out.
I didn't feel like other lesbians. Like, I didn't want to cut my hair short, and I really didn't want to wear flannel, and I didn't really want to have big combat boots. It wasn't my thing, and so I was like, well, maybe I'm not a lesbian. Maybe I'm not actually, because I don't fit the mold of what I'm seeing. At 21, I was at a friend's house. He was a beautiful drag queen. I'm a photographer, so I was doing photography, and I was photographing him, putting on his makeup. And I was, bemoaning my fate, like, I don't like guys, but I don't look like lesbians, and lesbians don't really know that I'm a lesbian, so maybe I'm not a lesbian, maybe I'm asexual. I mean, I remember having this conversation, and he just slapped me on my hand. He goes, girl, you ain't a lesbian, you're a femme. I was like, what? I'm like, I'm a what? I had no idea what he was talking about. So I went to the library, because that's what smart girls do. I was like, I need to look up this thing named femme. I was like, wow, and there was like one book. And it kind of said, femme is a feminine woman. And so I spent a lot of time struggling with what does femme identity mean to me. And so what I kind of came up for myself, it is an empowerment that is very queer specific, that femme is a queer identity. And what that is that there is a power in being gay or lesbian or queer, or however you identify, in femme, because it's without apology. You're not doing it for anybody. You're not doing it for a man. You're not doing it for a butch. You're not doing it for a society. And actually, there's a lot of power in claiming that femininity. And so when I started to really think about it and get to the place where I was going to actually identify as femme, I wanted to identify it as a powerful self-identification, in that I'm unapologetic about being feminine looking. I don't think that there's weakness in femininity, and that my sex and my sexual desire actually belongs to me and not to everybody else. And I see that in a lot of straight communities, and even some of our communities, that your sexuality belongs to whomever finds you sexually attractive, as opposed to your sexuality belonging to you and you deciding who gets to have that sexuality.
I grew up in a very traditional Catholic household. Machismo was in play, but it was very subtle, but it was there. I grew up and people used to say, estás bonita pero gordita. So you're pretty, but you're chunky. You have a really cute face, but if you just lost a couple inches, right? But I've always been chubby. I've always been a big girl. Never in my life have I been skinny. And I actually came out to my best friend April 29th of 2002. And then I came out to my mom that summer, July, and I wrote my mom this really long letter. I never said the word lesbian, but I said, Mom, I know you'll love me no matter who or what I am. For her, it was a big shock, but coming out to my mom was amazing because she supported me automatically, no questions asked. And my father, on the other hand, we had a don't ask, don't tell. He was paying for college, so it was in my best interest to not say anything because I was disowned, and so I didn't say anything for 7 years. And I just came out to my father last year. And when I told him, I just kind of said it. I was like, Dad, I'm gay. And the first thing he said to me was, if there was any way that you can disappoint me, this would be it. And he was like, it's wrong. It's against God's will. You're my daughter. I love you, but it's wrong. And we didn't talk about it for like a year. And just recently we started talking again, but we don't talk about it. He continues to deny what he knows. What I feel he's always known, but now has been confirmed, he continues to deny it.
Once I knew I was a femme, it created a perspective through which I could look at things. It made me understand much more about my desire, who I was attracted to and not attracted to. There is something wonderful about being large because your body parts are very noticeable. You know, if people want to talk about your legs or your thighs or think about your arms, there's a lot to think about. So in sex, I think if your partner likes your size, they get to pay attention to your size, and there's more to pay attention to. And I love that, you know, you can linger over body parts for a while because they're big. And that's always really kind of sweet, you know. I mean, if I didn't have bigger thighs, then, you know, I guess you could move through it pretty fast. But I think they draw attention. The body parts draw more attention to themselves.
I first claimed the femme identity, I would say when I was 20. I loved wearing dresses. I remember we went to Mexico for a wedding, and I had this beautiful yellow, very big piñata dresses, like ruffles, and it looked like a piñata because it's just ruffles everywhere. And I loved that dress. It was like my favorite dress. And I've always been feminine. I've always really liked my femininity and wearing makeup and just really expressing being a woman. But I think it was till I was in my first lesbian relationship that I took a hold of femme. I couldn't really express how I felt because I was the only gay woman in a group of gay men. And so I always got confused as a fag hag. And I really hated it because I'm feminine, but I'm still queer. Like, I was really holding on to that queer identity. I don't remember where I read the word. I don't remember where I saw it. Once I realized what femme was, I was like, that is me. And I just grabbed the hold of it, and that's when I felt like I really blossomed in my queer identity. Even though I was out, I felt something was missing. I didn't feel like I was queer enough. Like, I felt like it wasn't even about being seen, it just, I didn't feel complete. And then once I identified as femme, I was like, yes, this is what I am. Like, I'm a high femme with chola roots, you know, kind of doing. So that's kind of where the Fierce Femme nickname came from, because I'm femme, but it's, I'll kick your ass too while I'm wearing like 5-inch heels, you know?
When I'm talking about my own body, even with people, whether they're partners, people I know, or people that are new to me, I use the term fat. And for me specifically, that's because all of the other stuff is basically a euphemism for fat.
I identify as fat. I identify as a fierce fat femme. But growing up, it was always gordita. For the most part, now in my life right now, fat is probably what I use the most.
Picking a word to use when I think about my size, you know, it's a very sensitive thing. As a kid growing up and I was not thin, you went to the store and they had the husky section, which I hated because it sounded like you were going to be buying coveralls. But now, having gone through that husky as a child and hating it, and really feeling emotionally embarrassed by being called husky, I think of myself now as queen size.
My favorite body part is my tummy. Some people have like kind of jiggly fat. I do not have jiggly fat. My fat is solid. It's been there a long time, since I was really young, and it is very solid, and I dare say muscular fat.
I like my lips. I love wearing like a dark garnet red because it really brings attention to my mouth, which your mouth is the most central body part, at least I think so. I like my breasts, and I like my hips. I really, really like my hips. I think when I'm dancing, that's like my favorite body part, to move my hips.
I'm very fond of my legs because I think they're lovely shaped. I think they have a very nice shape, and they've always been big. So I would always want to wear skirts that accentuated that. But rather than really short skirts, I wanted to wear skirts that came just a little bit lower so that when the skirt came up, you would notice the leg. Or I would wear skirts with a slit up halfway up to my thigh, so when you walked, you would notice one of my legs. I like my shoulders. I think the shoulders get overlooked way too much. I think shoulders are really lovely. You can see shoulders as plump, and you can feel the flesh of the shoulder, and it's very engaging and inviting. Cleavage is lovely. Cleavage is wonderful. I love cleavage. I like it on myself and on other people.
My perfect bra and panty combo. Well, I like red. Red makes me feel sexy. I like lace kind of bras with lace kind of panties, and they make me feel sexy.
I love lace. Anything with lace. A buccaneer bra with like a dark plum, burgundy, and black lace, and matching panties. And I think I actually own that combo. The best thing about being fat and sex is you have more to hold on to. There's more hips, right? For me, it's a beautiful feeling when I'm completely naked and my partner touches my belly. It's beautiful because that's my biggest body part, right? Like my belly is my biggest body part. And for them to really navigate my body like a map, it's a very beautiful thing. I mean, I think there's something hot about seeing your big thunder thighs in between someone's head, you know? I mean, it's hot, you know what I mean? Like, yeah, it's hot and it's a lot of flesh. Like, I like flesh. And I think the best thing about being fat and sex is that you have more to work with.
I think it's very helpful for younger queen-size femmes to have examples, people they can look to, who they can say, oh yeah, you're compelling. If young queen-size femmes can have images of what it means to be beautiful and sexy and expressive and smart and be yourself, they can survive. If they can figure out how to search them out, if we can be them so they have something to find, life will be a lot easier. I mean, it's the same thing everybody else needs. We want to see ourselves reflected out in the world. And if you're young and you're fat and everything in the culture tells you you're unattractive and unlovable and not smart and lazy, you're not going to be happy. But it's incumbent upon them to look for those of us who are happy so that they know they can get there too.
I think some of the advice I have for younger fat femmes is enjoy your young fat body. Because your body is amazing. Don't worry about your arms. Don't worry about your double chin. Don't worry about your thighs. Don't worry about your belly. Wear short sleeveless shit. Wear short skirts. Wear tight things. And don't waste it. Because at some point you are going to get older. And trust me, it does change. And you want to enjoy that. You want to enjoy your arms when they're 25. You want to enjoy your thighs when they're 25. And I think that one of the things I would also tell younger fat femmes is to not be ashamed of being fat, that it's totally okay to live in your body and to figure out ways in which to love and be sexual in your skin.
There's a dedication at the end of the film to my mom about being her gordita, and how I named my production company Sin Vergüenza, because that's what my mom has always called me, a Sin Vergüenza. So just wanted to share that part. Yeah, it feels a little dark though. Can we get a little bit of light? Because I want to see, I mean, y'all looking real pretty and cute and sexy from up here, so, you know. I want to be able to see y'all's faces. So I made this film back in 2011. So it's actually pretty old for what's considered a film. Films usually have a shelf life of like 1 to 2 years. You do like the film circuit. And so it's surprising to me that it's still kind of like making its rounds. I moved to San Francisco for grad school, and San Francisco was always something temporary for me. And every time I try to leave the Bay Area, it keeps pulling me back in. And I always said I was getting ready to move back to LA, and I was like, okay, I have to do QuackMap, which is the Queer Women of Color Media Arts Project, where they teach queer and trans people of color how to make films. And so I got in, and I was like, okay, I'm gonna make a film, and then I'm gonna move to LA. And so this was my first film that I ever made, first time I ever touched a camera. I wasn't supposed to be in the film. There was a third person, this Afro-Latina, that was gonna be in the film. It didn't work out, and my instructor was like, do me a favor, have your best friend interview with the same questions that you interviewed Jewel Gomez and Miss Chris, or Christine de la Rosa. And I was like, no, I'm the director. Like, I want to be the bossy bitch. Like, no, And she was like, just do it. And I'm really glad that she pushed me to it because Christine de la Rosa and Joe Gomez were like my mentors, my femme mentors, right? They're my elders, right? And I'm glad that she did because it ended up being like this intergenerational conversation between the three of us. You're seeing about 15 minutes. The first film you're supposed to make, your Quack Map, is 5 minutes long. My first cut was half an hour. And she's like, girl, you're tripping. But then 2 people like dropped out of the class and I was like, well, can I have their 5 minutes, right? So I'm really good at negotiating and compromise. And that's why it ended up being 15 minutes. But you're seeing 15 minutes and I have actually about 10 hours of footage. So each interview was about 3 hours long. We talked about how like class and race informs the way that we perform femme, how things change based on who we're dating or not dating and single and all this stuff. So the conversation is a lot bigger, but you're getting like a little small taste of it. So yeah, I mean, I see it and I still cringe sometimes at the mistakes. I hope you don't see them. But I'm thankful for that opportunity because I just wanted to make a film where I saw myself reflected. I was like, I want to see fat brown people on the big screen. And I did it, and I didn't realize how far it would go or how far it would take me, right? It showed that frame line, and this white gay boy came up to me and in tears. And he was like, thank you so much for your film. It saved my life. And in my head, I was like, I was not thinking about you when I made this film. But, right, I was like, you're not the audience, right? But all that to say that I was like, okay, like it's obviously like body and fatness and queerness and being other than your body is like something that affects all of us, right? And so like, what does it mean to be other than like main society culture and then to be othered again by your own community, right? And so, yeah, I'll just leave it at that.
So we start talking now, right? I took so many notes.
I know.
I took so many notes while we were watching. So this is the 3rd time I've seen it. And I wrote necessary, and I was thinking about how, at least in the disability justice work I'm doing, beauty is a political act, is being read as a political act right now. Beauty is a political act, and I like how the whole conversation was framed outside of all the different ways that we think about it. And I was just wondering, like, was there an intentional, like, did you have folks wear specific outfits for specific reasons? Because I know a lot of the ways, can you all hear me? I know a lot of the ways that fat is discussed and clothes for fat folks is discussed. It's matronly, it's not tight or form-fitting, it's not colorful, it's not bright. And so was there like a conversation of what folks were gonna wear and why they were wearing it?
Yeah, so when you make a film, you talk about your spine, right? Like your spine is like, what's the emotion that you, like a spine of a book, right? And like, what's the emotion that you want to emote? What are the colors that bring out those emotions? And so for me, it was always like, I kept coming back with like, unapologetically sexy, right? And so that's where the title came from, with conviction. Like, if I'm gonna do this, like, do it, right? We always talk about like, don't, there's like this meme that's like, if I'm gonna do something, I'm not gonna use half my ass, I'm gonna use all of my ass, right? But if I use half my ass, that's still a lot more than most people, right? But so when I interviewed both Joe Gomez and Cristina La Rosa in their homes. And specifically with Joe Gomez, I was like, right? I felt like I was in a museum, and I was like, don't touch anything. And I was like, but I also wanted to touch everything, right? And so I asked them to like wear colors that they feel sexy in and comfortable in. And it's funny because red is a color you shouldn't put in film. It bleeds too much, and it's really hard to color correct. And we all fucking wore red, right? And we're like, because, it's going to work. And so, yeah, and it's interesting because Joe Gomez, when she talked about underwear and sexiness, she talked about, like, cotton being sexy. And she's like, you need that shit to breathe, like, and it's just funny, And so I think that, like, we didn't show it in the film, but we talked about how, like, our aunts, I mean, specifically for me, like, my aunts were, like, my femme brute in a lot of ways, where, like, we would have parties, like, at the park in Griffith Park, and they would show up in, like, these fucking dresses that were, like, flamboyant and sequins and full-on face of makeup, you know? Which for me now is like doing my makeup is like my ritual, right? It's my form of self-care, and a lot of people are like, wow, that's a lot of time on the face, right? And I'm just like, yeah, and like it deserves it. Like I'm worshiping myself, you know? And that's my framework of what beauty is, you know?
I love that. What were some of the things that they were saying? Because it was so much longer. And when you said that, my heart like shattered, like, oh my God, the editing pressure. What were some of the things they were saying about race and fatness and feminist?
Yeah, we had a lot of conversations around like being poor and working class and how you can make something out of nothing. So for me specifically, it was like being rascuache, right? Like I remember growing up and going to the swap meet in San Fernando Valley, and like you bought like a dress that was $10, and that shit was gonna last you maybe 2 wears because it's cheap fabric, right? But that you would make it look like, damn, right? Like Rent the Runway status, you know? And so we talked a lot about how like, as femmes of color, navigating, like being able to code switch and navigate certain spaces where like we're not being seen as too much, like professionally, but also trying to be too much and be extra, and like navigating that balance. And then also that like femme is often seen as something very like ingrained with capitalism because we're consuming like clothing and makeup and like all this stuff. And I'm just like, yeah, but so is every other queer in this world, right? Like if I want to spend $100 on makeup and you want to spend $100 on the binder, like that's my prerogative, right? Like if that's what makes me feel seen and feel in my body, then like, why is femme always seen as like a consumerist kind of thing when really we're all consumerists, right?
Yeah, and I don't think femme necessarily is like synonymous with consumerism and capitalism. Like I think the way that the way the folks were talking about beauty in the film was beauty outside of capitalism. That's why I was thinking like beauty as political.
Yeah, absolutely. Yeah, I mean,
it's more than that.
Yeah, it's more than that, right? I think like just like, I don't know, maybe it's my experience that I have had the conversation that I had that femme does get like equated to consumerism and stuff, but also growing up poor and working class and being like, no, like it's you're navigating this. We're all living in a capitalist society, right? And so when we're talking about like beauty is political, it's like, yeah, like oftentimes people want everything of us, right? They want our culture, they want our skin tone color, they want, you know, our everything, right? Our time, right? Our fucking emotional labor, right? But they don't want to like invest in us either, right? So when people reach out to me, I'm just like, okay, you get 15 minutes, and after that, like you owe me lunch or a drink or something, because my labor is like, you know, like it's exhausting sometimes, right? And so, you know, like I always come back to like, you know, you're saying like beauty is political, like absolutely, right? Like in the world where I'm fat and I'm brown and I'm still have an accent sometimes and all these things where I have pushed myself to be an overachiever, to be enough.
Oh my God, to
right?
overcompensate.
To overcompensate, and then my father to ultimately say like, you're not enough, and this is the one way that you're disappointing me, right? It's like to be able to show up in my dad's face with my partners or by myself in my feminist is a very political act, right? Like in my own home that I grew up in that like rejected me.
It's a perfect segue to Shayna's
Yeah.
Yeah, of course. Of course. All right, pause.
Pause.
I want to first say that I want to dedicate this talk to all the folks who lean into the unknown and share their stories anyway. I want to dedicate this talk to my wife, Amy. Oh. I want to begin by sharing with you all a part of myself. It's something that I don't talk frequently about. When I was 17, I was diagnosed with manic depression. And I want to stop there because by uttering those two small words, manic depression, I've just created a very strong negative ripple effect in this auditorium. Perhaps you're now viewing my body differently than you did when you heard my intro. Perhaps you're ascribing stereotypes onto my body that aren't mine. I think it's important that you all know that at this point, I want to say thank you all for listening, and I want to go off stage, but I'm going to stay. So much clapping. We're all familiar with the phrases depression. We're familiar with the term mania, right? Perhaps you've used these words colloquially, right? I feel so depressed today. He's acting so manic. For me, mania and depression were felt in more invasive, regular, everyday ways, right? They literally invaded into my everyday. And although this is just my experience, I think it's important to know, too, that everyone's experience is radically different. I was 17. I graduated high school. I was beginning my journey into a local JC. And for me, depression felt like an overwhelming weightiness. I felt like I was in a room without a doorknob. Getting out of the bed and beginning the day was a success in and of itself. I was so suicidal that I couldn't drive, so my mother would drive me to my college, wait for 3 hours in the parking lot, pick me up, drive me back home. Although it wasn't as frequent or as long-standing, for me, mania was an overwhelming sense of focus and energy, and I truly felt invincible. By the time I finished my PhD work, I was hospitalized 4 times. Now, this is not how I was going to start my TED Talk. Not even close. I was going to talk to you all about the statistics surrounding madness. I was going to talk to you about semantics. I was going to tell you about the history of how we conceive of and inscribe madness. And it wasn't until the 4th draft of my talk that I realized I had completely written myself out of this conversation. And I had to pause and ask myself, why? Why in a talk where I was going to explore the negative ripple effects created by the ways in which we conceive of madness had I written out my narrative, right? A narrative that so completely fit into the conversation. And the answer is simple and I think absolutely problematic in its simplicity. And it's one word. It's shame and it's stigma. Even as I stand here before all of you, I am feeling very apprehensive about how I am being read, how my body is being read by my former, my current, my future students. How is my body and my identity being read by my colleagues? Am I being read as inferior, as incompetent, as untrustworthy? Some of you might even be sitting and thinking quietly to yourselves, but she doesn't look crazy. And to that question, I ask you, but what does craziness look like? And in fact, we have been taught what craziness looks like, right? Many institutions in our society have taught us and have helped us cultivate a very strict and rigid understanding of madness. And just to illustrate the speed at which this happens and has happened for all of us since we were very young, I want you all to pause with me and think. What do you think of? What images, what connotations, what do you think of when you hear the word insane? What do you think of when you hear the word crazy? What connotations and images come to mind when you hear the phrase mental illness? Perhaps your thoughts and your images are informed by the way the news media ascribes disabilities and psychiatric disabilities and madness. Perhaps your thoughts are informed by literature, right? By graphic novels, by the movies. I go to the movies. Okay? Perhaps you thought of Girl Interrupted, One Flew Over the Cuckoo's Nest, Psycho, Mommy Dearest, or A Beautiful Mind. Irregardless of where you've given, these images or where you've gotten these images from, I think that a very rigid list of stereotypes gets created. And although we could probably sit together and keep adding to this list, a very brief list is as follows. Folks with psychiatric disabilities are often viewed as being dangerous, unpredictable, incompetent, unstable, irrational, and irresponsible. Now, the images or connotations that you so quickly call to mind when I ask you all to pause and just meditate on the words insane, crazy, and mental illness, the images that I've pulled up that my mind went to, and these list of stereotypes, this is why it took me 4 drafts to write myself in this talk. The sheer universality of these terms and these images, right, and the weightiness regulate folks with psychiatric disabilities, regulate me, right? I think it's really important to note that unlike other illnesses of the mind, psychiatric disabilities carry with them something that's very distinct and unique. They carry a moral judgment on the individual, okay? So, what do we do with all of this? Before telling you that, I want to tell you what the purpose of this talk is not. I think often when folks with disabilities of any kind share their narratives or speak, they are often seen as an inspiration. Their story is meant to be heard and is meant to inspire you to bettering your life as non-disabled folks, or even as other disabled folks. I am here to tell you that I am not your inspiration. That's not my purpose. The purpose of this talk is to ask that we collectively cultivate a community and a space for unlearning the stereotypes and stigmas that we ascribe to psychiatric disabilities. Okay. I want us to live in a place where someone sharing that they have manic depression is as benign as someone saying to another person, I have diabetes, right? I want us to live in a place where the moral judgments that often get placed onto folks with psychiatric disabilities is removed. I want us to live in a place where I can come before a group of people or just a person this way and stand and say, my name is Shada Kafai. I'm a professor in the Ethnic and Women's Studies Department at Cal Poly Pomona. I have manic depression. Thank you.
So many notes.
I know, right? So I was watching this again, thinking about what we were just talking about. And I'll start by saying that some of the things that informed the talk was really, one of the main things was how we have depoliticized so many of our identities. We've depoliticized queerness, we've depoliticized fat, and we've really depoliticized disability in our culture. A lot of folks don't even know what ableism is. You know, like we're really familiar with other forms and other systems of oppression, like racism and sexism and heterosexism, but ableism is something that we don't know about, and that partially fueled this talk. Just the urgency to politicize our identities fueled the talk. And the other thing that did was also just this stigma around psychiatric disabilities in general and kind of the forced silence and shaming that folks experience. And I think, I don't know if other folks experience this or feel this, but I know for myself, I've always felt this pressure to be together. Pull it together, act together, perform together. And a big part of that comes back to ableism and this idea that non-disabled supremacy is a real thing in our culture. And I'm not saying able-bodied, I know that's what a lot of folks sometimes say, but disability studies is moving away from that because you can be able-bodied and still have a disability, so non-disability is the new term. So non-disabled supremacy is a thing, and neuroatypical folks are shamed and disabled folks are shamed, and performing togetherness and performing non-disability is just fucking exhausting. And you know, I I don't know of many jobs where you can call in and say, you know, my depression and my anxiety is really bad today, I can't come to work. Like, that's not going to be received in the same way as someone calling in and saying, you know, I have the flu today, or like I have a migraine and I can't come to work. Like, that is received in such a different way than saying anything psychiatric disability related. And so all of those things kind of made me arrive at the place where, okay, I'm going to do this. But then it took me even longer to say, well, I'll just talk about myself, because there's so much shame and stigma in, at least in my family. I'm first generation Iranian American, and so I think in communities of color, there's a lot of stigma, immigrant communities, a lot of stigma around mental health. I mean, to the point where, like, my family still tells me, like, you're doing great now. Like, you don't need to be on your medication anymore. I'm like, what? Like, I'm doing good because of my medication. Yeah. And that's, I mean, everybody has a different path and a journey toward healing, and I absolutely support that. But for me, I'm alive because of it. But, you know, I'll get things from my uncle, who doesn't talk to me now because I came out, which we can go to the family stuff too. But before I came out, he said, you know, my friend, like, was doing yoga every day and drinking orange juice, a cup of orange juice, and his depression went away. Like, you should try that.
Try that. You didn't try working out? You didn't go on a hike or
a cup of orange juice, you know? So I'm hoping that this is like knowing laughter, like you all have, you know, maybe not orange juice, maybe not yoga, but you've been told something else.
Moisturize?
Oh my God. Of course, why not?
Coconut oil.
Yeah, coconut oil.
Yeah. That's funny.
And you know, I started it by saying this is to hold space for other folks who don't feel comfortable or safe to have this conversation, because it feels so lonely to go mad and to feel mad and to, like, so for me, I don't think you are either crazy, or I'm going to use mad because I think crazy is problematic. I don't think you're either mad or sane. I think some people with psychiatric disabilities exist in a border space. So borderland space, like, think, you know, Gloria Ann's will do it, which a few folks were referencing today. So I'm a mad border body, right? Sometimes I am able to function with clarity, and other times I will be lecturing and I will have other thoughts in my head at the exact same time. So I go back and forth between those spaces, and so I think our rigid commitment to non-disability and sanity really just do a huge disservice to so many people. And that's where this talk came from.
Yeah. Can you talk a little bit about the parallels of, like, this narrative around coming out, either around, like, queerness, around, like, disabled, et cetera, right? And how, like, oftentimes people even borrow language from the queer community of, like, coming out as, like, you know, having an abortion, or coming out as, like, whatever, right? Like, they borrow this narrative of, like, coming out, and can you talk about, like, the parallels of coming out through those different identities you hold, both, like, in home, but also, like, outside of that?
I guess I'll start with at home, because you said that first. At home, the word disability is a bad word. So I was an English major first. I did my master's and my bachelor's in English, and then when I wanted to do my PhD focus in disability studies, that was like, I disappointed my parents. This was before I came out. And that was such a huge disappointment to them that I wanted to talk about disability, my disability. So at home, it was marginalized and suppressed as much as queer coming out as a narrative. And then, like, outside of the home, I think there's a lot of folks who borrow that same language. So folks that are chronically ill or who are spoonies. And spoon theory is super cool. Like, Google it if you haven't heard of it. but folks who are chronically ill or who are spoonies will sometimes use that language of coming out, or folks that have non-visible disabilities will use that like language of, talking to someone who maybe doesn't know and saying, I am or I have. And then at the same time, there's a lot of folks who've written about the limitations of that, because your body is always changing, your relationship to your illness or your impairment is always changing. And if you want to know more about that, Google Ellen Samuels. And I think the essay she wrote was like the limitations of the coming out narrative or the coming out discourse. Yeah.
Yeah. And then the other thing that you were talking about, how like you wrote yourself out of the conversation, right?
So easily.
So easily, and how I did not want to be in the film, right? Like this, like write ourselves
right, yeah.
out of the conversation. But I also think that like storytelling is so incredibly powerful and such it's a tool that communities of colors have used to like hold on to history and hold on to knowledge, and how storytelling is really about resilience. And I often think about how, we're all trying to create a world where we see ourselves reflected in powerful and beautiful ways. And so can you talk a little bit about like, what does that look like for you in creating a world where you see yourself reflected in all of your identities?
Well, the first thing that I thought of when you said storytelling was storytelling is survival. And with everything going on right now politically, I think storytelling, especially with our communities, is recognition and resilience and survival. And so like the space that you all held today for each other, like, and for me and our dog, like this was survival, this was healing to come and do this thinking and this work. Could you rephrase, or could you just say the question again?
Yeah, just how like we're often trying to create images of ourselves. Like we're trying to, in the beginning you said like, I'm not that inspiration, right?
Yeah.
But then we also are that reflection that we're like either intentionally or not for others of like who we are.
Yeah.
And just kind of how,
Oh, right.
like how our bodies are being read, right? Like how our bodies are being read either as like that intentional or not inspiration, or at least just that reflection, right? Like for me, like just even walking down the street and seeing another fat person, I'm like, yes, I want to go tell them like, I love your outfit, and like I see you and I see myself reflected in you, right? And even if they're not trying to be that for me, right? And just kind of talking about like at the end of the day, like we are still a reflection of each other, right? And how you navigate that and how your body's being read. And
Yeah, I mean, I think there's this, there's like two, well, maybe three different paths that disabled folks get read under and placed under. And the first is like inspiration porn, which is like, if you've seen pictures of disabled folks, physically disabled folks online, it'll say, if he can do it, so can you. And it's meant to like mobilize the non-disabled and galvanize them to like live their fullest potential, their fullest life potential. So I think that's one like rigid space. I think another way that disabled body minds get read is through this narrative of overcoming. Like you are not a valuable human person unless you overcome your disability, which is super problematic because most of us don't. And then what does that mean? And then that's why there's no space for someone to be able to call up and say, I'm too depressed to come to work today, right? Because you're supposed to have overcome it by now, And so I think those two really like rigid readings. Oh, I said there's a third one, right? The third one is like this medical gaze that your body needs to be cured or fixed. And if it's not your disability is not curable, not fixable, then you're not valid as a human being. And in movies, if the disabled person isn't able to be, cured or fixed, they just die. Like the disabled character just dies in the movie. What was that like romantic movie that just came out? Me and You, Me Without You.
oh,
Me After You. Okay, perfect. Couldn't be cured, so he died, right? So it's a very popular trope. If you start looking for it, you'll see it everywhere, unfortunately. So I think because those are such like limiting ways of like reading folks, that when we can politicize our disability, and a lot of folks are following crip theory, and just crip is short for cripple, and it's a way to say, it's a word to use that's going to intentionally jolt people and make you uncomfortable, because people don't like to even say the word disability or disabled. They say handicapable, handicapped, dis-abled. Like, what's the fear? I don't know. So a lot of folks are like retaliating with the language that they use to name themselves and name their community so that they're seen on their own terms. And then there's all these like different storytelling archives of people like gathering their narratives and putting it online or using specific hashtags as a way to like make themselves visible if you're too tired to go out and like see other people.
Yeah, we can totally talk about social media and like how oftentimes like we use social media to see ourselves reflected, right? In positive
let's go
ways.
there.
Let's go there.
Yeah, let's go there.
And I also want to talk about like how that intersects with like desirability, right? Around like how queer and disability and desirability intersects, and then you add on social media, right? Of like, oh man, she's a fat, beautiful femme, but like I want her Coke bottle figure instead of like my big panza, right? That just like right in, and also tell me where you're going.
I mean, just that, yes, it's this idea that, because there's more like plus size models now, but it's like not really, it's not really politically fat, because it's like you can be curvy and but you need to have your fat in all the right places.
Right, and it's all still kind of like toned.
Right, and it has a specific
figure,
Eurocentric like body. Yeah, okay.
And now that we're seeing like models with like disabilities coming on, like that's the new thing right now, right? Like, tell me.
I'm sorry.
I love it. No, I want to hear it.
Well, if there are disabled models or like disabled folks that are in the media now, so I'm thinking of Amy Mullins, or that other woman that was a Olympic medalist, and she was on Dancing with the Stars.
Yes.
I look to you all to see if you're nodding your heads, and some of you are, so I figure I'm okay. It's this idea that if you're disabled, you can be sexy if you're thin and white, and very much aligned with heteronormativity and cisgenderness, and
that a lot of these people have access to like very specific resources as well,
for sure.
Right? That allows them to navigate, right? Like when I think about power and privilege, I often think about like privilege is like how easily you can access safety. Right? Like, and I'm not gonna take credit for that. I totally heard this shit last night at a talk that I was at, but it stuck with me. I'm not gonna lie. I went to go see. My boo took me to go see Hannah Gadsby and Jill Soloway. Don't judge me. I was there for Hannah Gadsby. And so, but Hannah Gadsby said that, right? She was like, you know, power, and also. What's Stryker? Yes. Susan Stryker, that's her first name, right? Was also there. And I think it was actually her that she said, you know, like, privilege is about your being able, how easily you can access safety in a world that, like, is not meant to be safe for us, right? So the more marginalized you are or oppressed you are, right? And, like, the concept of, like, safety, right? And oftentimes, like, some of us do have to stay at home sometimes just to, like, if all you did today was breathe, is a big accomplishment for some folks some days, right? And so when we go back to like desirability politics, right, around like queerness and fatness and other bodies and social media, like it all gets complicated, right? And it's sometimes we either fall into that rabbit hole of scrolling because we just love someone and we're like, they're giving us life, and also like wanting to be like them or be more functional or beautiful like them, right?
So I also did some research because it's anxiety provoking. This is so much fun, but it is anxiety provoking to be like up here. So I was looking into the connection between fat justice and disability justice. And if y'all aren't familiar with disability justice, it's like the second wave of the disability rights movement, queer, people of color centric, because the first wave just wasn't.
At all.
And 3, queer disabled women of color created disability justice, although then lots of other like community folks came and engaged in the labor starting in 2005. But there was this idea that we need to decenter the politics and just the terms of desirability. And that's not me, that's Patty Byrne, who started Sins Invalid, which is just Sins Invalid is amazing. If you don't know their work, look them up. But they've really undergirded and just like moved and developed the momentum for disability justice. But yeah, like what does it look like to decenter what desirability means? Maybe through all these lenses that we're talking about?
Yeah, totally. Yeah, I know, because we can keep going.
Sure.
It's a good conversation, so we can go on, but
Yeah.
I'm gonna open up to the floor.
Oh, yeah.
It's on, I think. Okay. Hi. I right now am thinking a lot about bodies and the way that like the mind-body divide, sort of like I think Western society is like the mind and body is different. Like Descartes was like, it's different, they're different. But in both those films, you gave examples of ways that they influence each other. So like for instance, in yours, you were talking about how people see fat bodies and then they assume something about the way your mind works. You're like lazy or you're stupid. You were kind of talking about these stereotypes. But then in yours, you were talking about how once they hear about your mind, they assume things about your body.
Yeah.
And so I wanted to see if either of you could like talk about sort of the breaking down of the sort of divide that like your mind and body are two separate things, because I don't know, I don't believe that they are, but I was wondering if you could speak about that topic.
Yeah, should I go?
Yeah. Please do.
I'm having so much fun. I'm having so much fun right now.
Likewise.
Well, all of that comes from this very old patriarchal influenced philosophy idea that, the mind is feminine, therefore the mind is masculine and it's privileged and the body is feminized and it's, one way that disability justice activists are now trying to rectify that division, because that division also carried over into disability studies, where we're going to just focus on the body. We're not going to focus on the mind. So folks now, myself included, whenever we're writing about disability and we're talking about disability or non-disability, we write body-mind or mind-body as a way to say these two things are always in not just proximity, but always in conversation with one another. And we can't talk about people without acknowledging the specific body-mind dynamics that they inhabit. So just like linguistically, putting those words together has been one intervention that disability justice has given us.
My mind went to places. So first I thought about how, and this could be disassociation, I'm not sure, but I often in my mind didn't see myself as big as I actually was. So walking down the street and seeing myself reflected in the window, I was like, whoa, like I'm actually am that big, right? And so it was interesting, right? Because I've always been really confident, and I've been like in my body, feeling sexy, but never really acknowledging myself in my mind, like the body of like the bigness of my body, if that makes sense, right? And so I'm still kind of working through that. I think as an adult, like at 36, like I'm still kind of like, oh, like, why do I do that, right? And like, there's a lot that goes with that. But I also think about like, I fly very often, right? And there's a certain airline that I like to fly because I can use their customer of size policy, which means that I can access a free seat next to me so I don't spill over and I'm not doing this, traveling, right, or whatever. But I think about how accessibility as a fat person really affects my mind and my anxiety and how I navigate spaces and how I navigate the world, and how sometimes in my mind I make myself smaller so that I can be invisible and just get through. And sometimes, like there's a difference between being at the airport and like trying to squeeze myself into a seat that is not made for my body, and then like being at a bar and being like, move bitch, fat bitch coming through, and like being very, and so like about literally my body claims space, regardless if I want it to or not. And like how some spaces are accessible to me and some of them are not. And that it creates anxiety in my mind of like, how am I going to navigate that? And like, I have to mentally prepare myself for what my body puts me through, in a sense.
That also made me think about how, so there's a lot of fat phobia in disability studies, like first wave disability studies. So if y'all are interested, there's this phenomenal article. It's called Disability Studies Needs to Get Fat. And it does.
Yes.
And it's by Anna Mallow. Look it up. But it's this basic idea of like these connections. I was looking for connections between fat studies, fat justice, disability studies, and I think both bodies, for differing reasons, are viewed as an inconvenience, as uncivil to the larger social body, and as an inconvenience. And I think body-mind reclamation can perhaps also be a way to sever that distancing that we do. Yeah.
Yeah.
Hello. So since we're also talking about like digital spaces at this conference, and you brought up like desirability politics and things like that, so how does that play into like algorithms on social media sites, and how like needing to perform like desirability or beauty or sexiness or whatever in order for posts to even reach people, for it to like be put into the algorithm to reach people if we're doing like online activist work, and how that might play into like what you may or may not post or what you see other people posting, just things along those lines.
Yeah, I mean, I was that person that would be like, why does someone put 100 hashtags in one picture, right? I was like, but now I get it. So I'm either the person that puts like no hashtags or puts like 100 hashtags, right? And also like, yeah, I'm like, so many things are going through my mind right now. Which one do I want to say? I think that like social media makes visibility accessible in certain ways, right? And I think of like my friend Laura Luna and like some other femmes in the LA area who have the hashtag Femmes of Color visibility. And then she also has like Femmes over 35. So she's adding that whole like how are we fucking elders at 35, right? I'm like, damn. I'm like, but then at the same time, like I get it, because most trans people don't live to 35, right? So when you do, like you become an elder, right? And so like around history and that. And so anyways, visibility and social media, sorry, my brain went somewhere else. Can you repeat what you said? Because I'm so excited that my thoughts are just like, yeah.
It's not just you.
Right.
So I guess like just around desirability and like performing beauty, and like, so like pictures of people, like they'll put up like, more sexy pictures or pictures showing more skin for like more people to be able to view it on social media, and like how, I don't know, like the politics around that play into it, like what others might see as desirable versus how you might even want to be presenting yourself.
Yeah. I don't know if you want to say something. I'm still collecting my thoughts.
No, it's fine. I mean, so I'm coming at it from a disability justice perspective that says we all have intrinsic value and beauty and wholeness. Wholeness, not like speaking to the physicality, right, of our bodies and our minds. And I think that we can crip desirability. And we can crip beauty, and I think that if we do those things, then we can really expand the ways we view beauty and we define it, and we define desirability. And there's a performance artist who is fat and disabled and queer, and she talks about how her body was never normatively beautiful, and that she was called gross because of her fat, and what reclaiming grossness means for her. And so I think a part of like cripping or even queering beauty is just dismantling the normative definitions of it. And a lot of that work is happening with people posting their pictures online, disabled crip folks posting pictures online that have nothing to do with our, I shouldn't say our because we're a part of this, right? That have to do with the normative cis heteropatriarchy Eurocentric, non-disabled ideals of beauty. And I feel like those are these like small visual forms of interception in that conversation. And I'm seeing that happen on Instagram mostly and a little bit on Facebook.
Yeah. I think when I think about desire, I think about like vulnerability, right? Like to be vulnerable, to let someone see me like naked and fat and see like all the things that I'm like, still struggle with, right? Because I can sit up here and be like a chingona and a badass and be like, I'm fucking amazing, and I still have days that I struggle, right? Like there's still days where I'm like, I hate my arms, and there's days that I hate my thighs, and you know, like my fupa, and like, you know, everything, right? And so y'all know what fupa is, right? Okay. I was like, I saw some people go like this. It's like your fat upper pussy area, right? Yeah, okay, good. Right? Yeah, you're welcome. And so sometimes my fupa doesn't look nice in like leather pants, you know? And so I'm thinking about like what Cristina La Rosa was talking about, how like oftentimes we let people have our bodies because of like this cis who desires someone fat, right? And like I should be thankful or I should be happy that someone finds me desirable and wants to have sex with me or whatever, versus me getting to choose who has that, right? And I think along with like my fatness and my queerness and my femme identity, like that I have really chosen lovers that worship me, right? Because I should be worshipped, right? And for me to, and I find myself like, you know, both with my partner and my boo, you know, like, and so the way that she shows me, the way that she desires me, and the way that she loves me and worships me is very different the way that he does, right? And what does it mean to be with a woman who is tall and thin, and so kind of like falls into that space of like what queer is supposed to look like, right? Like that non-gender conforming kind of thing. And then what does it mean to also be desired by like a trans man who also has his stuff that shows up, his body stuff shows up in our intimacy, right? So what, you know, like, and so like navigating these two people in a way that like our shit shows up in intimacy and in desirability, right? And like how we navigate that and how we ultimately, like Christine said, like be in our body and be sexy and feel, you know, desired, but also know that like we deserve to be desired, right? Like we deserve to be worshipped and not just given like the crumbs because someone is a chubby chaser or wants to have an experience or is curious about what it means to fuck that kind of body.
I mean, that made me think too about how all of our bodies are given different sexual currency.
Yes.
Like, it's not universal, right? The sexual currency and the desirability currency, I guess, is not the same. And maybe that's part of queering and cripping beauty and desirability, this idea that we don't have to look at our bodies in relation to one another. Like, intrinsically, they have value, and intrinsically, they have, like, it doesn't have to be relational in that way.
Yeah, I still think about like my first date with my boo, and he was like, have you ever been with a trans person? And I was like, have you ever been with a fat person? Right? And like, and what does it mean to have to ask somebody, like, have you had that experience, yes or no, right? And like the weight that comes with that, you know, and also being like, and you're sexy, and I do want, and I do desire that, and I like, right? And so, yeah, like that relationship and what you're talking about, yeah.
I mean, this also kind of comes out of this larger conversation about how fat folks and disabled folks are desexualized in general, and how, and maybe that adds to the politics of desirability and everything we're talking about, because we are deliberately entering into spaces where we're pushing back against this framing of desexualization that isn't ours.
Yeah, and especially like when you're talking about like that currency, right? Like what does it mean for me to be with someone who like is aesthetically good looking, right? Who is like in the European kind of way, right? And the white kind of way, and be seen with this person, and people be like, damn, like she got him, like all right, you know, and just small things like even just like that person holding you in public or being seen with you in public, right? Not everybody who wants to fuck you wants to be seen in public with you, right? One more time for the people in the back. but like that's real, right? Like that's so real. So yeah, we're getting deep. So let's do another question.
Hello. Thank you both so much. This has been really wonderful and moving to listen to. Something I've been thinking about is how both with ability and size, there's this like connotation about what you can produce for society, and so your production being like a necessity to your value. And I think that that is true like in society, but also in like smaller activist circles. I know that, especially dealing with mental illness, it can be hard to even just like get out of the house. And so being able to sort of assess your value in that situation, has that affected both of you? Have you think about it in your work?
Yeah, absolutely. Yeah, I mean, that's why I was an overachiever my whole life. That's why I am an overachiever, because if I can prove that I can do that, right, then I'm valued, right? I think like even in high school, like I was in cheer and drill team, and I was co-captain. And I remember telling my girls, like in the team, like if my fat ass can do it, your ass can do it. And I would push myself to this choreography that was, hard to prove, right, that I was worth being co-captain, that I was worth being on the team, that I was worth being a leader, right? And then now as an adult, like, what I wear to work, right? Like, fat people get paid significantly less. Fat people get hired significantly less, right? Fat people are not heard, right? So now you add that being a woman, being queer, being femme, being fat, nobody's paying attention to me, right? So who in the room is gonna help echo and, like, elevate my voice, right? And so I can be heard. And when I think about like value, it's also connected to like, again, capitalism, right? Like if you can produce something, then you are of worth. And if you can't, then we should be getting rid of you, right? And that's why we have all this diet culture or like trying to fix your illness or, right? Like we need to fix you so that you can be of use to us,
Yeah. I mean, I think when you said production, I thought, okay, yes, capitalism and ableism are like in love with each other. Like these are two systems of oppression that function because of the other. They support each other. And I think there are a lot of activist spaces where you have to go to X number of meetings there's so many things you have to do. What if your body, mind cannot? Are you not seen as valuable? And there's this huge conversation that's happening too about activism in online spaces, and how activism in online is just as legitimate. Showing up and arranging meetings from your bed is legitimate, right? Yeah, I heard someone say that. Yeah. I think also, because I was also an overachiever, I guess I took the conversation to also another place of value, but also from just from my parents, that I would be seen as lovable if I produced. Which it sounds really terrible.
I mean, I was also an overachiever because I was the proof to my parents that it was worth them crossing the border, right? If I was the first to graduate, go to grad school, get a job, and like be this like thing, then it was worth crossing the border, right? I was that proof that like we did it, And so like, and I still struggle with being that overachiever, right? Of like, and how exhausting that can be in a lot of ways, right? Like that's exhausting to be showing up in that way all the time, Yeah.
Hi, thank you. So my question actually is a little bit more about race, and you both were hinting about the different ways that people are talking about fatness, about disability, etc., along racial lines, whether it's, first wave stuff, which automatically sort of connotes a whiteness to it, or sort of other ways of thinking about it too. And so my question is actually about how do you notice or do you notice the differences in the kinds of conversations, the centering, what's explained with sort of white folks and non-white folks? And what's especially coming to my mind right now for Dulce is that I personally haven't heard a sort of desirability description about body parts, about humor that's empowering as opposed to self-effacing from white folks in that kind of narrative, right? As I have like in this documentary or even other people that I know. And I'm wondering if that's like, you know, one thing or if that's part of a larger pattern, and how even sort of decentering those kinds of explanations and logics might help people more broadly and more quickly. Because to me, it was amazing to hear, you know, that comment about thighs, right? Or even sort of, you know, talking about half my ass in a way that's not about, you know, a sort of self-objectification and a self kind of, how do I say, do you get what I'm saying? Like it's like different, and to me that's amazing, right? Because that's what I want to point people to. Because usually when you think about like, you know, I think about, I don't know, fat femme comedians and other people in the media who are white women, for example, and just the way that they talk about things, the way that, you know, those are explored. It's, I don't know what it is, but it's an observation I've had, and I don't know what you guys think about it.
Yeah. You know, I think a lot about like home too, though. Because I think about how like in my family, everybody was fat, you know, like, or at least chubby. Nobody was in their weight range, right? And so like being seen or reflected in my aunts as fat women, right? But also not in the way of like how they were like shaming of themselves in a lot of ways. And I think about like, we're talking about home and just like, I keep coming back to like, how do I perform or how do I show up, right? As my full authentic self, and sometimes perform, being fat and being queer, and how does that change when it's home, like my home with my partner versus home like with my family here in East LA versus like here with you all, right? Like that authenticity or that conviction does range and it does change. And so race for me, when how that comes into play is often like, again, like how like fatness and like, at least for me as a Chicana, like just, there are a lot of fat people in the Latino community, right? But not a lot of fat people in Latino media, right? And so, and how Latinos talk about fatness, right? So like we often joke about how like, I literally landed and my mom picked me up from the airport, and what did she do? She fed me. Right? She was like, have some frijoles, some sopa de fideo, and some milanesas. And I'm like, hell yeah, right? And she's like, ¿cuántas tortillas? And I said, 2. How many did she make? 4. And did I eat them? Yes, right? But then, right? But when I packed for LA, I think about what I'm gonna wear in front of my mom and my sister because I don't want to fucking hear it sometimes. You know? Here in LA, but then when my mom is in the Bay Area visiting me, my mom came to my premiere of my film at the Queer Women of Color Film Festival, and I was single, and that day I wore this like very deep black shirt with a very small denim skirt, fishnets, and the little leopard booties that you saw in the background. And when I came out of the bathroom, my mom's like, "You're gonna wear that?" Right? She said, "Así vas a salir?" And I was like, fuck yeah. I was like, Mom, I'm single and I'm going to a Queer People of Color Film Festival. Like, bitch is gonna get a date, you know? Like, I'm gonna get a date, which is funny because that's where I met my partner, and my mom caught Michelle looking at my ass, staring at my ass. So when I started dating Michelle and I told my mom like, oh, I'm dating Michelle, she was like, oh, la que te vio las nalgas, right? Like the one that was staring at your ass, you know? And so it's funny because like, she was like, you're gonna wear that, but then she also kind of understood why I was wearing that, you know? And so like, my mom and I, you know, so the older my mom has gotten, the more she's also come into her body. And I think a lot of it has also been the conversations that we have, and like, me being her daughter has kind of allowed her to like just be fat. And she'll you know, I'd be like, Mom, you don't have to wear Spanx. Like, fuck it. You know, like, you still have a belly, just a smaller one. But a belly's a belly, you know? And so how oppressive, like, girdles are, how oppressive, like, binders are, how oppressive, like, these things that help us be in our body are still kind of oppressive in a lot of ways, if that makes sense, right? So I don't know if that answered your question, but that's where I went.
Okay, so where did I go? The first place I went was just thinking about when I was learning about disability studies, and it was one of like my areas for my qualifying exams. Okay, so I took the test, and then I looked at my books, and I realized there were no books by people of color that I was assigned, like none. And then I had to do this like background archival work. Like I'm sure there's other people out there that are people of color and disabled. And this activist named Melissa Thompson was saying that we've always been here. It's just nobody writes about or values our work. And another disabled activist of color said, I thought I was a unicorn. Like she thought that as a woman of color, disabled, like there were no other women of color that were disabled. So people are there. They've always been there since the 70s, right? Maybe even sooner, but I was able to go as far back as the 70s. But I think you were asking, like, what are some of the differences in people of color spaces?
Well, more sort of like the narrative like that gets constructed, the way that people are talking about things, the sort of acceptance that comes from a sort of conditional thing that's more and a way of coping that's like a humor that's been self-effacing.
Got it.
You know, all of these sorts of different things that feel contrary and it might be cultural and all these other sorts of things to sort of the image that was painted in both of these documentaries, especially this documentary, right?
Yeah.
In terms of thinking about like, well, getting up through my thigh, like this intimacy, this sort of detail, this kind of different narratives, and I wouldn't know. And so I'm asking both of you if you notice a difference in narrative.
Okay, so I haven't experienced like a humor in the ways that disabled folks and disability justice folks get together to talk and share space. But what I have noticed that shifts the narrative is this flexibility and freedom to ask for what a body-mind needs. You're in the middle of a meeting and somebody's arm cramps and they pause and they believe that they deserve to ask for what they need. Because we live in this like capitalistic American culture that like pull yourself up by your bootstraps, you are independent, when really like interdependence is the thing. So in those spaces, people will stop and ask for what they need, say what they need. And I think that's a radical thing that I've noticed that's different in disabled people of color spaces. And I think another thing too that I've noticed is people showing up for each other ahead of time or just checking in and saying, what do you need? Like my Femmes of Color, when I was organizing an event, kept texting me every week, do you need anything? Thank you for your labor. And I was like, no, I don't need it. But just to know that they were there. So there's this emphasis on what do you need and also emboldening one another to ask for what you need and not feel shame about asking for what your body mind needs.
Yeah, and like showing up for each other, and it's like even in small, like not everything has to be like these like very big political things, right? But like it can be very small acts of like solidarity, right? Of like going to a restaurant and asking for not getting a booth because I am not going to fit in that booth, right? Or like going to a restaurant and being like, actually, I need that chair that doesn't have armrest because my thighs are going to pinch and I'm going to be uncomfortable and I'm not going to be present with you during our dinner time together, right? And so like the way we show up for each other and like asking for our needs to just be able to show up.
And I love that you're saying it could be small. Small things can be so grand and so powerful and so political.
Yeah.
We only have enough time for like one small question, and then I encourage all of us to continue the conversation in the reception.
Hi. Thank you very much. You're amazing, both of you. My question, you started talking about that shit right now, but my question is related to how non-normative body-mind spirits are allowed or not to create knowledge? How are we understood or validated as producers of knowledge? In the sense that one of the things that always comes to my mind is, okay, I'm writing all this, but for real, for who? Like, who is going to read? Like, no one respects me at all. So, in that process of looking for respectability, that you have both traits, right, with this overachievement kind of trope, that I feel really, I identify with that a lot. And kind of like establishing a parallel with what you were saying about asking what we need. So I was thinking about the, I don't know, thoughts, ideas you might have about the ways in which academia and spaces of knowledge production that are basically banned for most of us. Like how can we create dynamics in those spaces to actually ask for what we need? Because honestly, for example, when I was starting at UC Santa Cruz, like I didn't want to ask for accommodations. I was like, I am insulted with myself that I need accommodations and I cannot fake it anymore. You know what I mean?
Yeah.
So yeah, I wanted to hear more about that.
I mean, so I've been trying to think through what does a femme praxis look like, and I'm still like tossing it around, but I think that is one of the ways that we can, understand that all of us, we have capital, even though we're told that we don't, and also that we are valuable producers of knowledge, even though we're told that we don't, or that we are not. And I think what I've kind of come to around what femme praxis can be, for at least for myself, the politics of disclosure and vulnerability is super important. So in my classroom spaces, with a few colleagues that I'm close with, like I will let people know when my spoons are low. Like I will tell my class, like I'm slow on processing today, like bear with me, my spoons are low, and I think that if we can, at least in my experience, if we can cultivate those spaces of vulnerability, even in something as rigid as academia that says there is no space for vulnerability here, right? It all has to be mind, intellect, there's no space for emotions. I think that's one way of doing it, and I will default to an Audre Lorde quote on my arm that says, "Our feelings are our most genuine paths to knowledge." And I genuinely believe that. And I think that's one way to just open the space up. And at first, people are really awkward, And I felt very awkward doing it. And now I feel like I have such permission to be that vulnerable in spaces. It's not always received, but I am convinced that's one way to do it.
I think about I barely survive academia. I'm not even gonna lie, right? Like, I think about going back and I'm like, I must really be a masochist.
Which isn't a bad thing.
It's not a bad thing. I'm here for it, but it's not my particular kind of kink. And so I think a lot about I think about when I talk about going to grad school, I talk about how I went to grad school to learn new language for stuff that I already knew, right? Or gave me, and also gave me frameworks, right? Like theory and practice and all that. But I'm I was talking to Daphne earlier and I was in grad school, I just learned to say that's problematic instead of saying that's fucked up, I just little things like that, or instead of saying I'm triggered, instead of saying I'm triggered, I would just be you are, fucking with me right now and you need to slow your roll. It was just a polite way of saying certain things I already knew how to say. But as producers of knowledge, I always, one of the things that really was the most liberating for me once I left grad school and I was more in community spaces was making things accessible to people, right? I work at a rape crisis center, we have an anti-repression framework, and we think about is, when we do group agreements, the last group agreements that I always say is, I am not here as an expert, right? I'm here as a facilitator of your own reflection, right? So when we do an 8-hour anti-oppression training, I am there facilitating, right, their own reflection. And so again, like making things accessible to people. Like, what does it mean for me to have a master's and work at this nonprofit and, do all these things if I can't break that shit down for my mom?
Yes.
Like if I can't bring it home, like if my mom can't tell people what I do for a living other than like, oh, le gusta ayudar a la gente, like she likes to help people and she works with like really diverse people, and I'm just like, okay, mom, right? Like it's cute, but like if my mom can't, if I can't break it down for my mom, if it's not tangible for her, then like what am I doing, right? So it's not just about producing knowledge, but how accessible is it to people, And yeah, I'll just stop there.
That was amazing. Thank you so much for speaking on your experiences. Thank you all for such awesome questions and sharing space with us. Brenda and I are just going to do some quick remarks. I don't think we actually introduced ourselves the whole day, but I'm Daphne Luna. I'm one of the co-coordinators for today. And this is?
I'm Brenda Lara. I'm the other co-coordinator for today.
We're the two. So I'm just going to read what I wrote as my reflection for today. I am Daphne Luna, and as a fat, queer femme of color with invisible disabilities, this conference and its theme is very dear to me. For me, it was important that the bodies and experiences of our community are allowed and really just to take up space in an institution that is not catered for us. And oftentimes, it doesn't support us, or kind of all the time. For many of us, the way we resist self-care and heal from this institution and other oppressive institutions that use biological essentialism, capitalist ableist productivity standards, and gendered emotional labor demands is through alternate spaces. Instagram, Tumblr, Twitter, Facebook, YouTube, independent film, and on. For me, it was necessary to highlight alternate ways our bodies seek to happily and authentically exist in our mutant body minds, thank you, Soft, deviance and difference. We wanted to create a space that is rooted in body liberation from biological essentialist violence toward fat, queer, transgender, intersex, and people of color.
All right. As a passing bisexual Chicana, and I mean passing in both ways, a lot of times people don't think I'm queer, and a lot of times people don't think I'm a person of color. Many times society assumes my identity, that's including my sexual identity, and as a result, I'm delved into a toxic, homophobic, heteronormative space, as many toxic people tell me many horrible things about what they think our society should look like. This is not the space. Daphne and I tried to the best of our abilities to open up a space where people could share their research that does not assume identity, but instead tells us what it is. That deconstructs the heteropatriarchal spaces, and that panels reflect on powerful LGBTQ issues because our gender and sexuality intersects many facets that include colonization, race, class, ability. Our presenters brought knowledge to these facets that is not only useful, but extremely necessary. It is necessary to love, as Dulce stated, to love as queers, not only ourselves, but others. So thank you, Dulce and Shada, for sharing your narratives, for sharing the beauty in our bodies and in our minds, and for bringing them together as they intersect and celebrating them. Yeah. Especially important as someone who has had a family with an ancestry of schizophrenia and who was diagnosed with dementia a couple of years ago. I really appreciated your talk, Shada. And Dulce, thank you again, because even though I'm not a fat femme, I understand how bad it is for the world to tell you how your body should be. And I could only imagine. So thank you for that. I think more importantly, in this digital age, I think it's so necessary to share our experiences, to share our knowledge, to share our feels, as I did with our panel. In a world of like hashtags, memes, and YouTube comments, it is so necessary to share our narratives, and it is so necessary to add to the academic knowledge. I think today we did that, even if it was just for a moment. But I think that we need to continue to do that. So in the morning, Gaspar de Alba shared a powerful resolution for our trans siblings. And I would invite you all to sign it, as it demands that the UC system recognize trans folks, gender fluid folks, non-binary folks, and every identity in between and outside the binary. That they protect these individuals within the sanctuary space. And I invite all of you to sign it. And I want to thank all of you for attending and for contributing to this community and to this wonderful space.
Yay. Reception is in 306 in the balcony, so go enjoy food. Oh, we also have some flags that I'm sending to the different institutions that are trying to erase trans folks. We have one for Roger Severino, the asshole that's pushing that. And then Janet Napolitano, because she kind of sucks. And also Chancellor Block, because, yeah, they haven't released anything. They also kind of suck. So, yeah, well, I'm going to mail them to them. So put your best wishes or angry little notes, whatever makes you happy.
Can I also just say thank you to you both for all your labor in making this happen? Thank you.
Thank you, Dulce. That's exactly what I was going to say. They have been working for an entire year on this conference. These are my students, my mentees, and we have been meeting every week for a year for this conference because they believe so much in this theme. And you created an amazing space. And then, as I said it this morning, we all collectively created what turned out to be an incredible day. And I'm so happy and proud of you guys, and you know, your presentation was just the perfect, absolute perfect, you know, broche de oro.
Thank you.
All right, so let's go party and eat some more food. Everybody gotta try the handmade quesadillas if you're okay with dairy.